Imagine spending $83 million to build this massive state-of-the-art house.
Right.
And then the city just comes in and bulldozes the entire thing the very next day. Why? Because you forgot to sign, like, a single piece of standard paperwork.
It is wild, but that is exactly what just happened in Virginia politics.
Yeah, and the fallout is just completely tearing the state apart.
It really is a stunning collapse.
Yeah.
And the ripple effects are, well, they're reaching all the way to the highest levels of power in Washington.
So let's get you caught up on the news right away. Virginia voters recently went to the polls and passed a massive redistricting amendment.
And it was close.
Oh, it was a nail-biter. The yes vote squeaked by with a slim margin. I mean, it was 51.69% to 48.31%.
Right.
If this amendment had survived, it would have totally flipped the state's congressional map. Right now, Virginia uses a highly competitive map. It's split right down the middle with 6 Democrats and 5 Republicans.
Yes, the 6-to-5 map.
Exactly. But this new amendment would have erased those boundaries. It would have replaced them with a map heavily favoring Democrats. We're talking about a crushing 10-to-1 advantage.
But the courts stepped in. They brought the whole thing crashing down.
Exactly. On May 8th, 2026, the Virginia Supreme Court struck the entire amendment down in a 4-to-3 decision.
And they didn't even rule on whether the map was fair or unfair, did they?
No, they didn't. They ruled that state politicians broke their own strict procedural rules just to get the amendment on the ballot in the first place.
So the new map is dead.
Dead. The U.S. Supreme Court completely refused to intervene. And now a massive civil war has exploded between national leaders in Washington and state leaders in Virginia over, what to do next.
So today on the Deep Dive, we're tearing into a mountain of sources. We've got court documents, financial reports, and leaked insider conversations.
The fun stuff.
Oh, yeah. We're going to map out exactly how this historic political gamble unfolded. We'll look at why the courts threw it out and what this chaos actually means for the balance of power in Washington.
And as a quick reminder to you listening, we take no sides here.
Nope.
We are just laying out the facts, the statistics, and the perspectives of both Republicans and Democrats exactly as they appear in our source material.
Right. So if over 1.6 million Virginians went to the polls and said yes to this, how does a judge just, wave a wand and cancel their votes?
It's a great question. To understand that, we first need to look at what was actually on the line here and the intense national warfare that created this map in the first place.
Yeah, because you have to look at the sheer scale of the changes they were trying to make.
Right.
Political experts were actually calling the proposed map the baconmander.
The baconmander, which, is a pretty funny play on the word gerrymander.
It is. And when you actually look at the physical drawings of the proposed map, you immediately see why they called it that. State lawmakers sliced up heavily Democratic areas and stretched them out.
Right, into these long, thin strips all across the state. They genuinely look like strips of bacon frying in a pan.
It's a classic tactic. Let's look at the actual statistics for Northern Virginia, which has a massive concentration of Democratic voters.
Okay, lay the numbers on us.
So under the old map, Prince William County was split into 2 congressional districts. But under the new map, lawmakers sliced it into 5 different districts.
Wow.
Yeah, and Fairfax County went from being split into 3 districts to being split into 5.
It's like having a giant cherry pie, and instead of cutting normal triangle slices, you meticulously carve out these weird, winding ribbons.
Right, just to make absolutely sure there's a chunk of cherry filling in every single piece you serve.
Exactly. You're spreading your favorite flavor out so it dominates the whole pie. By slicing up those dense Democratic areas and attaching those strips to more rural, conservative parts of the state, Democrats could outvote Republicans in areas they normally wouldn't win.
Which is the mechanical strategy behind turning a competitive 6-to-5 map into a 10-to-1 Democratic stronghold. And you really have to understand the broader context here. This wasn't just a local Virginia idea born out of nowhere.
No, not at all.
This was the centerpiece of a massive national war over district lines. Over in Washington, House Minority Leader Hakeem Jeffries was demanding a strategy he explicitly called maximum warfare.
Maximum warfare. That's a strong phrase.
It is. He wanted the party to fight for every possible seat in every single state by whatever legal means necessary.
Because Republicans were doing the exact same thing in other states. Right?
Precisely. Republicans in states like Texas, Florida, and Tennessee had recently drawn their own maps.
Right.
And those maps were strategically designed to gain the GOP about 5 new seats in the U.S. House of Representatives.
Ah, okay.
So Jeffries looked at that national chessboard and realized he needed a major, crushing victory somewhere else just to cancel out those Republican gains. And Virginia became the ultimate target.
And when Washington makes you a target, the money follows. I knew ballot measures were expensive, but the numbers in our sources are just staggering.
They really are.
This campaign became the most expensive ballot measure in Virginia history. Political groups burned through over $83 million fighting over this single issue.
It is an incredible amount of money. The groups supporting the amendment, which were aligned with Democrats, spent $64 million.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. And our sources point out that a massive chunk of that was dark money, meaning the groups don't have to disclose who their donors actually are.
Right.
On the other side, Republican-aligned groups opposing the measure raised around $20 million.
I mean, stop and think about that scale for a second. $83 million. We're talking about a tsunami of television ads, mailers, canvassers knocking on doors, and high-priced legal teams, all focused entirely on one single question on the ballot.
And that intense focus makes sense when you realize what's at stake. Critics of the measure, mainly Republicans, argued this was a blatant, illegal partisan power grab.
Right.
But supporters argued it was a necessary defense. They felt they had to redraw the lines in Virginia to protect themselves from the boundary lines being redrawn by Republicans in other states.
Okay, so that brings us right back to my original question. You have an $83 million machine pushing this. You have 1.6 million people voting to approve it. How does the court just erase it?
Because in Virginia, the voters are actually the second step in the constitutional process, not the first.
Okay.
The map didn't fail because it lacked popularity at the ballot box. It failed because the lawmakers who wrote it made a massive procedural blunder before the voters even saw it.
Let's walk through that blunder. Because on May 8th, the state Supreme Court strikes it down 4-3. And it all comes down to the strict rules in the state's constitution.
Right. You can't just rewrite the Virginia Constitution overnight.
Right. You have to pass the proposed amendment through the state legislature twice. And a general election has to happen in between those two votes.
Exactly. It's designed to be a safeguard. It's this mandatory cooling off period that gives the voters a chance to weigh in.
Make their voices heard.
Yeah, if the voters hate the proposed constitutional change,
Right.
they can vote out the politicians who supported it in that general election before the second and final vote ever happens.
Right.
The exact phrasing in the rule says the first passage has to happen before the general election.
Which, I mean, sounds simple enough. Just look at a calendar, right? So
Yeah.
where did these highly experienced politicians actually mess up?
They messed up the timing. Lawmakers passed the amendment for the first time after early voting for the general election had already started.
Wait, seriously, people were literally already casting their ballots.
Yes, over 1 million Virginians had already voted. That was more than 33% of the total voter turnout for the entire state.
Oh, wow.
So the Virginia Supreme Court looked at that timeline and said, you can't logically claim you passed this before the general election when a third of the state has already voted in it. The election wasn't upcoming, it was already well underway.
That is just a staggering mistake. You have these brilliant political strategists mapping out districts down to the street level, but they tripped over a basic early voting calendar on the wall.
And the crazy part is, that wasn't even the only mistake they made.
There's more.
Oh, yes. Before this case ever reached the state Supreme Court, a lower court judge named Jack Hurley Jr. flagged an entire laundry list of other procedural violations.
Wait, so they called a special session to deal with a budget dispute and just tried to sneak a massive constitutional map change into it?
That's exactly what Judge Hurley ruled. He said the special session was legally called for a budget. Shoving a redistricting bill into it fell completely outside the legal scope of that session.
It's like calling a plumber to your house to fix a leaky sink, and when he gets there, he starts trying to install a new roof. It's just entirely out of bounds.
It really is.
Yeah.
And Hurley found more. State law requires any proposed constitutional amendment to be posted publicly at circuit clerk offices at least 90 days before the election.
Right, so people can actually read it.
Exactly. It's to ensure the public has ample time to digest major changes. Lawmakers were rushing the timeline so fast, they completely missed that 90-day window.
So they missed the public notice deadline, too. What about the actual ballot itself? When you're an informed voter walking into the booth, you expect the text to just, lay out the facts. But Hurley had an issue with that as well, didn't he?
He did. The question printed on the ballot asked voters if they wanted to temporarily adopt new districts to restore fairness.
Restore fairness.
Yeah. Judge Hurley ruled that using the phrase restore fairness is legally misleading. Under the law, ballot language has to be totally neutral. It can't be a marketing pitch.
Right.
By telling voters the change will restore fairness, the government is essentially putting its thumb on the scale and leading the witness. So he ruled the language unconstitutional.
Now, obviously, the two political parties had wildly different reactions to a judge tossing out an election result. We have to look at both sides impartially here. So how do Republicans react?
Republicans universally praised the courts. They argued the judges did exactly what they're supposed to do, uphold the rule of law.
Right.
From their perspective, the courts stopped an illegal partisan power grab. They argued that you can't just ignore the state constitution and skip mandatory deadlines just because it's politically convenient for your party.
And on the other side, Democrats must have been furious.
Absolutely furious. Democratic leaders, including Virginia Governor Abigail Spanberger, pointed out that more than 3 million people participated in that election.
That's a huge turnout.
Right. So they argued that by striking down the amendment over procedural timing issues, the courts effectively erased the will of millions of voters on a technicality.
I mean, it really forces you to ask a question about basic competence in politics. Did seasoned lawmakers honestly just forget the state's rules? Or were they just rushing so aggressively to beat the clock for the 2026 midterms that they tripped over their own feet?
Well, the sources strongly suggest it was a case of aggressive rushing. They were desperately trying to get this 10-to-1 map in place to impact the upcoming 2026 midterm elections.
Yes.
And in their hurry to execute this national strategy, they collided head-on with the slow, rigid, unforgiving rules of constitutional law.
Okay, so the state Supreme Court ultimately rejects the map. It's dead. And this is where the story takes a truly wild turn behind closed doors.
It really does.
Because the failure of this map triggers a massive public fallout between the national leaders in Washington and the state leaders in Virginia.
Right. Once the U.S. Supreme Court completely refused to hear the appeal, the national Democratic strategy hit a solid brick wall. And that's when the leaked details from private meetings revealed just how far national leaders were willing to go to salvage the situation.
The idea they pitched next sounds like something a screenwriter would reject for being too unrealistic in a political thriller.
Yeah, House Minority Leader Hakeem Jeffries got into private discussions with Virginia Democratic House members, and they brainstormed what they called a bank shot proposal.
Like in pool, where you bounce the cue ball off the cushion to hit your target.
Exactly, an indirect path.
So if the direct path of passing the map failed, what on earth was the bank shot?
The proposal was to go directly after the Virginia Supreme Court itself. They discussed passing a brand new state law that would forcefully lower the mandatory retirement age for Virginia Supreme Court justices.
Wait, let me make sure I'm following the mechanics of this. Why lower the retirement age?
Because if you lower the mandatory retirement age enough, you immediately force the current sitting justices to retire.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. It was a thinly veiled strategy to effectively fire all 7 current justices on the state's highest court in one fell swoop.
That's incredible.
And once the bench was completely empty, they could pack the court by appointing 7 brand new justices who would agree to force the new 10-to-1 map through anyway.
That is just an explosive idea.
Yeah.
Trying to fire an entire state Supreme Court because you lost a procedural case. Think about the historical weight of court packing.
Right.
It almost never works, and it usually blows up in the face of the party trying it. How did the local Virginia politicians react to Washington trying to dictate this?
It caused an immediate, massive state-level rebellion. Virginia Governor Abigail Spanberger and State Senate Majority Leader Scott Survell killed the idea instantly.
I bet.
They looked at the political reality on the ground and said, absolutely not.
I can't even imagine the nightmare optics of that for a state governor. You're basically telling your citizens, hey, we lost in court, so we fire all the judges.
Exactly. And Survell pointed out a very specific, glaring problem with the Washington plan. If they lowered the retirement age and forced the entire court to retire, they would be firing the state's first Black female Chief Justice.
Oh, wow. Yeah, the political blowback from doing that would have been absolutely catastrophic for them in Virginia.
Completely. So the state leaders draw a hard line in the sand. They look at Washington and say, no, we are not firing our judges.
But it didn't stay a polite behind-closed-doors disagreement, did it?
No. The clash went completely public. Governor Spanberger gave an interview where she publicly rebuked Hakeem Jeffries by name. She bluntly told him and anyone else in Washington pushing the issue to stop talking about Virginia redistricting.
That is a fascinating break in party ranks. You have a state governor essentially telling the national leader of her own party to back off and mind his own business.
She really didn't hold back. She called the entire redistricting effort a distraction.
Wow.
She said it was outrageously premature to be talking about risky map changes and court packing when they needed to focus on actually winning the upcoming elections.
And she just shut it down.
Yeah, Spanberger fully conceded defeat on the issue and announced that the 2026 midterms will proceed using the old, highly competitive 6-5 maps.
You'd think that would be the end of it, but the tension spilled over into Washington, too. There was a meeting of the Virginia congressional delegation that got incredibly heated.
Yes. At that delegation meeting, Representative Rob Whitman, a Republican whose district was heavily targeted for elimination by the new map, he confronted Governor Spanberger face to face.
What did he challenge her on?
He essentially called out her past record. He pointed out to everyone in the room that back in 2020, Spanberger had been a highly vocal supporter of using an independent bipartisan commission to draw election maps.
Okay.
So he challenged her on why she was suddenly supporting a baconmander map drawn entirely by partisan politicians in the legislature.
Which is a pretty sharp pivot. How did she defend that shift?
Well, Spanberger countered by arguing that the voters ultimately had a right to decide the issue. Her stance was that because the legislature put the amendment to a public referendum, it was ultimately up to the people of Virginia, not her, to make the final call on whether they wanted politician-drawn maps or not.
Interesting.
But the exchange just highlights how bitter and deeply personal this fight became across the board.
It really makes you wonder about the strategy here. Isn't it incredibly risky for a national leader in Washington to try and override a state governor on her home turf? It sounds like playing with political fire that ended up just, well, burning their own side.
It's a classic conflict between national goals and local realities.
Ugh.
Think about how these two leaders are looking at the world. Jeffries is looking at a massive national chessboard.
Yeah.
He needs to find House seats anywhere he can get them to win control of Congress. But Spanberger doesn't govern the country. She has to actually govern the state of Virginia.
That's a very different job.
Exactly. She has to worry about her state approval ratings, the state constitution, and local optics. When national ambitions push too hard against local constraints, things fracture.
If we pull back and look at the bigger picture, the whole saga is just stunning. Think about what we've unpacked here today.
Yeah.
An $83 million effort, backed by the highest levels of national leadership, supported by over 1.5 million voters at the ballot box, and the entire thing completely falls apart.
Unbelievable.
The old boundaries remain exactly as they were, the money is gone, and the politicians are just left pointing fingers at each other in the press.
It's a remarkable sequence of events, and it proves that endless money and political momentum are not always enough to overcome the rigid, strict rules written into a state constitution.
Which brings me to a final thought I want to leave you with today. If you're listening to this and shaking your head at the chaos, think about the sheer, undeniable power of procedure. In our system of government, the way you do something is just as important as what you do.
And that is absolutely the ultimate takeaway here. You can't just focus on the final will. You have to respect the machinery that gets you there.
Exactly. If an $83 million national political machine, armed with the brightest legal minds and practically unlimited funding, can be entirely derailed just because they ignored the specific dates on an early voting calendar, what else is out there? What other sweeping historic changes in our society, our laws, or our lives are currently hanging by the thread of a single overlooked rule? It's easy to get caught up in the big, dramatic political speeches, but keep a close eye on the boring, procedural details, because as we just saw in Virginia, those boring details just might dictate the future of the country.